So here's some free advice. If you're playing chess with somebody and say you take one of their pieces and it makes them smile in response, you should be worried. Chess is one of those games that involves strategy, and if you're good at chess, you know not to think just one move ahead, what piece of your opponent you want to take on your next turn, but you're thinking much more complicated terms of several moves down the road. Sometimes in a good game of chess, you'll even set things up to make your opponent sort of take the bait of a trap and take one of your pieces, and it will lure them into a position where you can then eliminate more of their pieces or get rid of, say, their really important pieces like their queen, or maybe even put them into checkmate and take their king or trap them. In other words, if you're playing against somebody in a game of chess and you think you've made a smart move by taking one of their pieces and they look at you with a grin, you may be in for more trouble than you realized. The thing about chess is it forces you to think about a further out future than just the immediate present moment. And if you play much chess, you learn that sometimes what looks bad in the present moment doesn't really affect you. What you're really concerned about is the end game, is about how you set up checkmate for your opponent, which means that other people who are watching might think, why aren't you sad? You just lost a pawn or you just lost your rook. And you can see differently. You know better. You are seeing further down the road. You are seeing how all these pieces actually come together toward victory in the end. I was never that good at chess to be able to see more than maybe one or two moves ahead myself, but I get the idea. I've seen how other people can strategize and see almost the whole course of the game from the opening moves that they make or how their opponent responds. And I think something like that is what it means to be people who live in hope in light of what Jesus promises, even though the rest of the world might feel like it's falling apart or headed into chaos. This coming Sunday, we start a new church year, and in this new season of Advent, where we're looking forward to God's promised future, we're looking especially at how we have hope, even when the rest of the world still feels like it's losing its mind, or when the rest of the world is caught in despair. There's a certain genius to how the church's year is laid out, that here in these days, where we're getting actually closest to the darkest of the darkest of the darkest of the days here in our hemisphere of the world, that we begin a little bit in advance to say, no, there's a new day coming. It's like when you get up on these early December days or late November days and the sky's still dark, but you know a new day is about to start. Even if the evidence around doesn't look like it, you know a new day is beginning. It's sort of like every day playing chess, knowing that every day it might look like a loss, but you're really a part of something bigger that leads towards God's ultimate victory. Jesus has this interesting way of saying it in Luke's gospel. We're going to hear this coming Sunday. Jesus is giving advice, direction to his disciples about how to face times when it feels like everything else is falling apart, when the sea is in commotion and the nations are in an uproar and all the things that people thought were solid, even the sun and the moon and stars, the most dependable things you could set your calendars and your clocks to, even when those are shaken, Jesus says, your response, you stand up and you raise your head. Even when it feels like the world around is in chaos, we're people whose hope is based on God's promised future. And God's way of sort of winning, you could say, God's way of reigning and bringing victory for the creation looks like loss, right? A cross, after all, looks like death, right? It looks like, well, God lost there, and yet we're convinced that God's great victory happens in Jesus' death and resurrection. So we're people who are taught to read the signs of the times differently from the world around us. And other people are freaking out. We don't have to say, hooray, we're glad that terrible things are happening, but we can keep our cool. We can say, you know what? We're keyed into God's way of winning. We're keyed into God's grand design for things. And so we can be people of hope even if everybody else around us feels like they are trapped in despair. In other words, we don't have to get shaken by the day-to-day ups and downs. Like if you live your life based on where the stock market ends on any given day, you'll be up and down over the course of every business day. You can feel like everything is completely shaken. If you live your life based on whether your team is winning or losing or whether the weather is the way you want it to be, all those things are completely unstable and will let us down. Jesus teaches us to live differently, sort of like we're playing, or at least we're witnessing God's cosmic chess game. That on any given day, it might look like we're in the midst of loss. Oh, another pawn is taken off the board. But it might well be that we're watching something that God has allowed to happen, or God is arranging in such a way that God's victory can happen. So Jesus' direction to his disciples, even if it feels like the world is falling apart, you stand up and raise your head. Your redemption is drawing near. Christians are at our best people of hope, people who aren't swayed completely by the ups or downs of a given day, but who are dare to be keyed into God's promised victory and God's promise of new creation, because we know that that's where the story is headed, because we know God's endgame of life for all people, of resurrection, of this gathering of people from every nation and tribe and tongue and God's new creation. Because we're keyed into that, we live differently with hope right now. That's what makes hope different from mere optimism. Optimism is sort of wishful thinking. I hope things work out the way I want. Hope is able to say, even when things don't look like they're going your way, even when you lose another piece off the board, you can trust there might be design that allows victory still to happen. If you've ever seen that look in the eye of a chess player who knows what they're doing, you know what it's like to live not based on the moment by moment, but in light of a promised future, in light of the end game. That's where our conversation is headed this coming Sunday, as we begin a new season and a focus this Advent on life on the edge of hope. We hope you'll join us for that conversation and for this time in worship as we live our lives oriented toward God's promised future. See you then.